Hello all, this is Emrix from the MDF, and today I'm going to be taking another look at the Makro Racer and more specifically the actual menu and settings. Now, to start off with, I've got the machine switched on, and if you look, we've got the mode at the top. Now if you go over to the right, it's showing all metal, 2-tone, 3-tone and the beach. By default when you switch it on, it's in 2-tone. But you can have it in the all metal mode, which is pretty much the most powerful setting because it's not using its circuitry to discriminate out any metals at all. It's basically the deepest setting. But if that's not to your preference, 2-tone is pretty much the deepest discrimination mode you can use. Obviously you've got the 3-tone and you go over to the beach mode. With the beach mode we used a couple of weeks ago, where I had the gain up on quite high and it worked absolutely fantastic on my local beach. I really did pick up that target at you know, a deep depth within wet mineralized sand. Now if we go down to the gain mode here, the default is 70. Now that's quite hot actually, 70 actually, especially inland. I could have that up at 99 down at my local beach, which was no problem at all. But if you start going over that and you've got a fair bit of electromagnetic field in your area, or ground mineralization is that a bit higher, you might find it's going to be a lot chirpy or a bit unstable. So you can actually knock that down to around 65 and it will compensate nicely. Now the next stage is to go down to the threshold. Now the threshold is pretty much the threshold hum, and we can only sort of look at that if we go into all metal mode. Right, let's go back to all metal mode and we can go down to threshold, and that's at 55 at the moment, but you can lower that to any preference, you know, wherever you like it. You can knock it out completely, the threshold hum, or have it at a higher intensity if you want to get those, you know, real deep targets. Now if we go down to the ID filter, that's only going to be used in a discrimination mode, because that's obviously going to knock out certain unwanted metals, etc., like ferrous metals. Now if we go over to 2-tone, I'll put it down to ID filter. Now by default it's on 10. Basically anything below 10, which could be like hot rocks, etc., will knock them out. And but if you don't want to have like ferrous targets like bits of iron and stuff like that, if you don't want that, what you could do is, if you look at the screen at the top, it gives you a rough guideline of what the numbers are between the various metals. And to knock out ferrous, it will be anywhere between 0 and 40. So if I want to knock out iron, etc., you could knock that up to 40, like so. Get your finger pressed, speeds it up. So 40, and basically anything below 40 now will be knocked out. So we're not going to get ferrous, we're not going to get hot rocks, etc. It's as simple as that. Now let's go down past the ID filter. We've got the tracking. Now the tracking is basically an automated form of ground balance. It's actually constantly, the computer in it is constantly tracking in the ground all the time. So it's the easiest way to ground balance your machine. On actual clean ground, it's going to work perfectly fine. Heavily mineralized, you might have to go into manual or pumping, etc. But on clean ground, like I say, it's going to be a perfectly adequate way to ground balance your machine automatically. Right, let's go down to frequency shift. Now the frequency shift is pretty much to do with, like, you know, outside interferences. Like you might have, for example, on a rally, you've got a couple of guys next to you with machines that are interfering, which are close to the frequency that you're using on the Makro Racer, and they're interfering with your machine. Now you can use frequency shift just to basically change the frequency up and down. There's 5 different frequencies there, and you can change them around to whatever your preference is, just to get rid of this outside interference. But you might get interference from electromagnetic field, might be a bit higher in your area, or other sort of electrical interferences, etc. Or it might be just due to having the gain up too high. So basically the best thing to do is just make sure you have the gain, you know, try lowering the gain first, and if that doesn't solve the situation, then go to the frequency shift. According to the manual, if you use the frequency shift, it can impede the performance. So the best thing to do first is just lower that gain. I think the main setting on this machine is pretty much the gain, which is the sensitivity. So, you know, depending on what, you know, ground conditions or electromagnetic interference you've got in your area, you've just got to up and down. You've got to set the setting up and down on the gain to whatever you can cope with. You know, if you've got relatively clean ground and hardly any electromagnetic interference, just up your gain. You know, if you've got if it's chirping like crazy or you've got interference elsewhere, try lowering the gain down. It's as simple as that. That is the main, you know, the main setting for this machine, really. Anyway, let's go down to the audio tone. Basically, you've got 5 audio tones. It's purely for your own preference. You can't hear it at the moment because I've got I've not got any targets in front of the coil. I didn't want it sort of chirping off while I'm creating the video, but you've actually got 5 different tones, audio tones. And if we go down again, for the hearing impaired, you've got vibration, and that goes up to 5, or you can have it to 0 to turn it off, and basically that will vibrate the handle when you actually you know, you actually hit a target. It will not only beep, you actually vibrate strongly the handle. That works quite well, and you can have that at different intensities. So that's fantastic for the hearing impaired. It's a nice little addition there. And what else have we got? If we go down, we can go down to the backlight, and that's basically the backlight just for the screen. That's not the flashlight. So the backlight, you just got various intensity of backlights on 5 at the moment, which is the brightest, and you can knock that right down to off completely or down to 1. And there you have it. There's the actual, all the basic settings. Now there's a couple of settings that are not quite as apparent and obvious. Right, the first setting to look at is the actual flashlight. Now to turn the flashlight on, all we have to do is make sure we're in shot. Is if I turn the macro around, you can see the actual flashlight there. Now to operate that, all we have to do is pull the pinpoint trigger, pull it in, and then at the same time press the top button, and that, as you can see, is activated the actual flashlight. Now if we want to turn that off, all we have to do is simply do the same, pull the trigger in and press the top button, and there you have it, it's switched off. Now if you want the target ID depth reading in inches or centimetres, the way to do it is by pressing the left and right plus and minus keys simultaneously, but that has to be done before you switch the Makro Racer on. So let's switch it off. We'll switch these simultaneously. It's a bit awkward when I'm doing the filming, but we'll press them both together and then we'll switch them on. And it's SI, so that means it's basically in centimetres. So if we get a target and it's showing depth, it's going to show it in centimetres. Now if we want it in inches, we need to get it to come up as US. So basically we'll switch off again. We'll press those 2 buttons simultaneously and then switch on. And there you have it, US. Now we're going to be in inches. So if you detect a target, it will show you the depth in inches. And it's as simple as that.